Hello, I'm Mark Payne with the West Virginia Humanities Council. Welcome to History Alive. History Alive is a program of the West Virginia Humanities Council that brings 15 historical characters to life through portrayals by presenters who have conducted thorough scholarly research into their character. The Humanities Council makes these characters available free to nonprofit organizations across West Virginia, such as schools, libraries, historical societies, and a wide range of civic groups. History Alive is designed as an interactive experience between the character and the audience. Each presentation consists of 3 parts: a monologue, a question-answer session with the character, and then a question-answer session with the presenter. It is a very special occasion when a historical figure like Robert E. Lee, Ann Bailey, or Booker T. Washington arrives at your door. While that feeling is difficult to reproduce in the studio, we hope to give just a sample of how a History Alive presentation might add to the offerings at your school or organization. At this time, I would like to welcome today's guest from history. We are fortunate to have with us Chief John Logan, Chief of the Cayugas. After Chief Logan shares his thoughts with us, he will sit with me for a few questions.
Brothers, listen. I am Tagayuta of the Cayugas, one of the 6 fires of the Haudenosaunee you call League of the Iroquois. My father, Shikalimus, had been born a white man, but came to live among the Cayugas after a great battle. It is the tradition of our people that captives taken in battle are adopted into the nations to at once honor the slain and replace them to their loved ones, or burn in the fire to honor the slain also and help to cover their blood. My father was adopted and grew to become an honored counselor among the Oneidas and then the Cayugas. When I had 16 winters, a godman came to the village, and we were washed into the river. Many songs were sung, and our names were changed, and I became John Logan. Logan to honor a friend of my father, and John to honor a friend of the Christ. In those days, there were many wars. My father grew sick, and when he died after a long illness, I became chief among the Cayugas at Shamokin. Always I sought to follow the path of the Christ. Always I sought the path of peace for my people. One such great war was the great war between the father of all the English, King George, and the father of all the Canadas, King Louis. After this war was done, and the father of the Canadas and the father of the English were once again friends, the Delaware and the Ottawa under Pontiac came to our village, and they asked that our warriors join them in their battles. Again, wishing to follow the path of peace, I counseled for peace. Pontiac became angry, and he said, if we would not help them in their battles, we must also be their enemy. Many of my family flew at the bequest of friends to Philadelphia, there to settle on the Conestoga. There, said Conrad Weiser, you will be safe among your friends. But there many of the Irish were as unruly children to their father, King George. One of my sisters were killed by the Paxtons. Many of them moved in to the banks of the Yellow Creek, a few miles up from the mouth, where it empties into the great Olegan Sepin you call the Ohio River. For many years, we lived in peace on the Olegan Sepin. We know that the whites always came down the river in the same order. First came hunters and trappers like ourselves, who only wished to live among us and who honored our ways, many of whom began families in the nation. And came God-men, who were good men, who spoke great truths, but never seemed to be satisfied by our progress. And came traders who brought guns and ammunition for the hunt, iron tools, axes, knives, and kettles, blankets and cloth, beads and rum. Then came men in big canoes with iron strings, and they would straighten the strings on the banks of the river and look through a glass and draw on the papers. Soon after these men came farmers. At first, we thought it a great joke that a man could think that he could own the land like one would a pipe or a shirt, and put it in his pocket. Then we thought that if we killed the farmers, or we killed the men in the big canoes, they would come no more. For the farmers burned the forest and fenced the meadows and cut deeply into the breast of our grandmother the earth with their iron plows so that she bled into the streams. But when we killed them, this brought the soldiers, the blue coat, long knives, who built strong houses on the banks of the stream and who shot at our people. One such soldier was Michael Cressup. In the spring of '74, Cressup brought his army of Virginians to the river. They encamped across the river from the Yellow Creek settlement. And they waited for the Indians to cross the river to the trading house. The Indians did not come. They were afraid of the soldiers. So they sent a man. And the man told them that they should come across the river for the drinking of rum and for a shooting match. Many of the people desired this soiree. And they went across the river. Among them was my remaining family. The Virginians there at Baker's Bottom said, "You are the guest. Shoot first at the mark." And when they had shot at the mark and their guns were empty, the Virginians fell on them and killed them all. Men, women, and children. There remains only left a little girl cousin. When I heard of this, it lit a fire of rage in my heart, and I sought to raise a hatchet that had long been buried, color with the blood of the English. All summer I waged war deep in Virginia. And at the end of this summer, there came a great army of the Virginians to meet at the mouth of the Kanawha-Seepy, there to attack the villages of the Shawnee. But Hokalisqua, the great Sachem of the Shawnees, had heard of this army, and he sent his warriors there to meet them. And there was a great battle. After this battle was done, both armies thought they had won. Both armies left the field. but the Virginians claimed to have won the battle. Lord Dunmore, John Murray, the governor of Virginia, had called for a great treaty a month later. He knew that the people would not honor the treaty if Logan's sign was not on the paper. So he sent a man known to Logan named Simon Girty. Now, Girty was known to Logan as a man who had been trained by the Seneca to carry words and carry them accurately. Girty took with him another man. They listened to the words that were in my heart and took them back to Dunmore's camp and gave them to John Gibson, who was also known to me. He was the father of my niece. And John Gibson wrote it down on the paper and gave it to Dunmore. Dunmore was said to have read it aloud to the camp. And it was read aloud and repeated so often that the men began to repeat it to themselves. Even the words appeared in newspapers in the East, in Williamsburg and New York and Philadelphia, and even crossed the great lake water to Europe, so that great men crossed the water to meet the simple son of nature who had said these words. Brothers, listen, I will give you now the words. I appeal to any white man to tell me if he has come to Logan's cabin hungry, that he gave him not meat, or if he came cold and naked, and he clothed him not. Throughout this long, bloody war, Logan remained idle in his cabin, an advocate for peace. Such was my love for the whites, that my own countrymen would point at my cabin in passing and say, "Here is Logan. He is the friend of whites." I sought to live with them, but for the injuries of one man, Michael Cressup. Last spring, in cold blood and unprovoked, Cressup's Virginians killed the last of Logan's family. There leaves not a drop of Logan's blood in any living creature. This called on me for revenge, and I have sought it. I have killed many, but for now my vengeance is glutted. For now I rejoice at the beams of peace for my people. But harbor you not a thought that this joy is born from fear, for Logan fears not. Logan never felt fear. He would not turn on his heel to save his life. For who is left? Who would mourn Logan? Not one. Bill! Bill! Is this you? Many years it's gone since I brought you here to Detroit. You are looking well. Has General Hamilton kept his word and given you the run of the fort? Yes, I know you're a prisoner, but he has told me that you would be treated well. You look well. Bill, count the notches on this hatchet. It is of no matter. There are upwards of 80. These are the scalps and the prisoners I have taken for the British. Bill, Logan treads not lightly in his moccasins. The manitoes are behind the trees when I go into the woods. They're even in my cabin when I go to sleep. I'm afraid they will fetch me and cast me into the lake of fire. The drums always in my head. Bill, yesterday I drank whiskey, and Captain Bobby this morning kicked me from the trading house, calling me a dog. I will not fight for the British anymore. If I thought the Americans would not just kill me on sight, I would fight for them now. I would kill as many of the British as I have Americans. Now be of good heart, Bill. Try not to escape. There are 100 leagues of Indian nation between you and your home. Even now, the Americans are talking about a prisoner exchange with the British officers. Soon you will return to your home. But I shall not return to Detroit. Bill, I can hunt the beaver and the deer as well as anyone. I think that I shall go back to the Huniata and there hunt the beaver and the deer. Yes, I'll not fight anymore, Bill. I think Logan will go home. I have spoken.
We're back with Chief Logan, who has agreed to answer a few questions with us after his talk. Chief Logan, if I could ask you, you don't appear to be in what I have always considered to be traditional Indian dress. How do you explain the different parts of your wardrobe?
For perhaps 100 winters, the Iroquois nation has been allied with the British. We have been true to the British, even throughout the part of history that the Americans have become as disobedient children to them. For many years, traders stopped at the village and would bring shirts and trade silver and guns to the chief and their family to solicit their agreement to setting up trade in their village. We have become wealthy, in your terms, from this trade. We feel the need to express our importance by displaying our wealth. We wonder why you whites hide your wealth in your pocket.
Well, I can assure you that I'm hiding none in mine. But the medal that you have hanging around your neck, is there a special significance to that?
This is the King George's Peace Medallion at the Treaty of Paris. We were given these to acknowledge the fact that the settlers would not come past the mountains. And this is a British officer's gorget to signify that they think Logan is someone of some great importance, perhaps a war captain or village chief.
I noticed the paint that you have around your eyes. Could you share with me what the significance of that?
Logan is in mourning. It is traditional for the Iroquoians to mourn for periods of up to 5 years, and this shows to the world that I mourn my family who have been lost.
You mentioned when you were speaking earlier that Michael Cressup was responsible for the death of your family. Could you talk a little bit more about the circumstances around that?
Lately, I have heard that Colonel Crisp has been exonerated from the atrocity at Yellow Creek. However, he said his alibi was that he was killing Indians on the Grave Creek when he was said to have been at Yellow Creek, so he could not have been guilty.
You're a very, if I may say so, a very eloquent speaker. Can you give me any information on how is it that if you are illiterate in as much as you can't read or write?
I read not the words, nor do I write them. There are many whose business it is to read and write the words. Logan's business is to speak with his brothers and speak in council. He is good at his job.
Where did you spend your youth when you were a young man?
Much of my youth was spent in Shamokin on the Susquehanna. There was a big village there in those days. It was the council town for the Cayugas. We would, oftentimes my brother and myself would accompany my father in his travels to Onondaga or to Logstown or to one of the other council towns for business of the Iroquois.
Mm-hmm. If I may, I'd like now to introduce the presenter who is who portrays Chief Logan, and this is Dan Cutler.
Hi.
Dan is one of the roster characters for the History Live program of the Humanities Council. So what I'd like to do now is what would happen in a typical History Live presentation, which is you break character and accept questions as a researcher. And I have some questions that I would like to ask you related to that, which is, why Chief Logan? What interested you in the life of that man that made you want to research him and portray him?
I first became acquainted with the idea that there were Indians in this part of the country before we knew anything about the Indians in the western part of the country. And I did not know why there was no information about them. Any school kid can come up with a Crazy Horse or Geronimo or Sitting Bull, but if you ask them who Hokulesqua was, they'll look at you with a blank stare. The Eastern Woodland were prolific in this area. They had the first association with the Europeans, and from then on, well, I suppose the culture went downhill from there. But I thought that it was a shame that this Eastern Woodland culture should be unknown to the children who live in their ancestral grounds.
Mm-hmm. But that's a very good point. And because of that, it seems like that would be especially challenging for you as a researcher to be able to delve in and get good information as you were developing your character of Chief Logan. So what was the first step you took in your research? I mean, where did you go and what sources did you use?
I think I first ran into the speech called Logan's Lament. I hadn't heard of it before, and when I read the eloquence and the pathos that was in the speech, and it's not something that one associates with ugh how type of mentality that is assigned to most Native Americans of that time. We've seen Last of the Mohicans, and we know that there were sometimes dichotomies in the Americans. I wanted to bring that out. I wanted to bring out that Logan was a three-dimensional character. Of course, the research, we have a couple of line drawings of Logan. We have in the Jefferson papers descriptions of the atrocity at Yellow Creek, written from the point of view of the people who perpetrated the atrocities. Most Native Americans then didn't read and write, so if it was written down, it was written down by one of the perpetrators or somebody who was not sympathetic to the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the mid 19th century, in fact, there was very little sympathy for the anything that happened during the Indian Wars, because everybody, both red and white, had had loved ones killed in that war.
Mm-hmm.
There were very few families who were untouched, and there was a lot of animosity that went a long time.
Speaking of a little bit about the writing of the history, during your monologue as Chief Logan, and we touched on it very briefly just a second ago with the question, you know, Chief Logan is really sort of talking about Michael Cressup as being responsible for the murder of his family, but I guess through having the opportunity to have historical hindsight, different information has come out about that.
A publication was published sometime after the atrocity. There was an inquest into the atrocity. A man named John Jacobs wrote a book to exonerate Cressup of all blame for anything. But actually what he did was end up telling us, in effect, that even though Cressup wasn't there at the actual Yellow Creek massacre, he was the colonel of the militia, and therefore was held responsible by many of the people, including Logan. Logan, who accepted responsibility for the inequities of his people. Cornstalk accepted the blame for the actions of his people, and I think it would have been appropriate for them to then assign the blame to the head of the militia in the Virginias.
Right. So when you were talking during the from the vantage point of your monologue, you were speaking as...
I was speaking as Logan, as he believed he would have
at that time.
At that time.
Okay, I understand. I have just one last question for you, Dan. I mean, you've been doing this for the Humanities Council now for a while. You're
4 years.
You're not a rookie by any stretch of the imagination.
Uh-huh.
What would you say has been one of the most interesting things that's happened to you when you've been out doing a presentation for History Live?
I think there's a I think in teaching anything, my original intention to start this was to try to give the kids something to want to learn by, to make them curious enough to want to learn for themselves what the truth was.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to ask questions, and I wanted to be able to answer the questions. What happened that I had not expected was that it became a learning process for me.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan. Helping to keep you informed on the Library Television Network, I want to thank you for watching History Alive.